I'm Jason Carter. Physical optimization defines my life. The day I was born, doctors nearly killed me with medical malpractice. They said I'd never walk. I've been proving them wrong for 35 years. It's easier than you think to obtain super optimal health. I've devoted my life to it, and with my help, you can too. I'm Jason Carter, and this is ENZYMENTAL. And welcome to ENZYMENTAL. I'm Jason Carter, and today I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit more about gluten. What is gluten exactly? Gluten is a collection of proteins, primarily the long amino acid chains, gliadins and glutenins, that make bread rise and give the delectable texture to so many processed and baked foods. Wheat contains the most gluten, and the closer a grain is in relation to wheat, the greater its ability to cause trouble for most people. This also includes things like spelt, rye, barley, triticale, which is a wheat-rye hybrid, and even oats. On the other hand, rice and corn are further removed from wheat and do not cause problems for those sensitive to gluten. Other gluten-free grains and flours would include things like sorghum, millet, amaranth, quinoa, almond, arrowroot, flax, potato, and tapioca, although some people say you should also avoid amaranth and quinoa because they are grains. So why are gluten grains causing so much trouble? One idea is that our bodies were not designed to handle the quantity of gluten that's found in today's foods. So from the beginning, the majority of mankind did not thrive on gluten-containing grains. Our bodies have not been able to adapt to these dietary changes efficiently. Although there are some people who can tolerate gluten, they may be in the extreme minority. As far as what gluten does in the digestive system, there is evidence that a high gluten diet alters the normal lining of the small intestine in even healthy people, which opens the possibility that gluten, particularly in large amounts, is not suited for any of us. Luckily, just as the high gluten diet can damage intestinal tissues, a gluten-free diet consistently reverses this damage. For people with celiac disease, the most well-known gluten-sensitive condition, consumption of gluten causes inflammation and damage to the lining of the small intestine, specifically the tiny hair-like projections called villi. We've talked about that in a prior video. The villi improve the absorptive efficiency of the intestine by increasing the surface area through which nutrients can be absorbed, and the flattening of the villi reduces this surface area to a fraction of that of a healthy intestine. So, as you can imagine, malabsorption becomes a serious problem, and the loss of vitamins, minerals, and calories often results in malnutrition despite an adequate diet. So when you consume gluten, a number of things can happen as far as your response to it. The main issue is that when consumed, gluten frequently causes the immune system to react as if the gluten was an invader, something the body must rid itself of. Another possibility is for the body to have an autoimmune response, which is when the body is unable to distinguish gluten from normal body tissues. The health effects of gluten are compounded by its ability to compromise the digestive system and thus nutrient absorption and assimilation, which then go on to impact the entire body, particularly the liver, skin, glandular system, and even the brain. So we talked about this before, but celiac disease affects both adults and children, primarily Caucasians or those of European descent, and can show up at any age. It often appears when a child is first introduced to cereal foods or can be triggered by emotional stress or even physical trauma, like surgery or pregnancy. The first signs are often diarrhea, extreme weight loss, nausea, abdominal swelling, large and frequently pale and/or light yellow-colored, foul-smelling stools, depression, fatigue, irritability, muscle cramps, and pain in the joints and bones. Over 150 medical conditions and symptoms have now been linked to gluten sensitivity. So as far as the types of sensitivities, celiac is found typically in 1 in every 170 healthy children in the U.S. and 1 in every 111 healthy adults. It's now understood that there are variations of this condition that tend to blur its prevalence. There's even a term called silent celiac disease, which is when the same damage is seen in the small intestines as found in classic celiac disease, but without any obvious symptoms. Latent celiac disease is when a person tests positive for antibodies, but has a negative biopsy and goes on to develop celiac disease months or even years later. Additionally, research in human genes now reveals that non-celiac gluten sensitivity or immune reactions to gluten may affect as many as 90 million Americans. There's even a theory that upwards of 60 to even 70% of the U.S. population possesses the genes that make a person susceptible to developing gluten sensitivity. So how do you determine your risk for gluten sensitivity? Gluten intolerance and celiac disease are more common than once believed, so here are some signs to listen to and ways to determine if you may be at risk. So one way to determine where you are as far as your risk factor in consuming gluten is to try an elimination diet, which is to try eliminating all gluten for at least 2 weeks and maybe even up to 6 weeks. If your symptoms improve, you most likely have a gluten sensitivity, and it might be best to stick with the diet that you're on during this elimination trial. So after the gluten has been eliminated for a period of time, a small amount of an avoided grain can be added back into your diet to see your reaction. Of course, this does not include those with celiac disease, who must avoid all intake of gluten to prevent severe health consequences. This condition should be ruled out before performing this experiment. So again, this experiment does not apply to those who actually have celiac disease. Those with any level of gluten sensitivity often have compromised digestive systems to begin with, so these type of people may be intolerant to other foods as well, particularly cow's milk and soy. So if symptoms do not improve with the elimination diet, you might also want to extend the elimination diet to other food groups to see what you might also be allergic to. Other contributors to gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance are digestive enzyme deficiencies, and this certainly includes a leaky gut wall, which is very common today, unfortunately, and even an overworked liver, which also impacts the immune system. These are all important factors in the development of food sensitivities. So while some people may be more genetically at risk than others, modern-day contributing factors such as the use of many common drugs, or exposure to chemicals like pesticides, or even overexposure to environmental factors like stress, viruses, chemicals, drugs, alcohol, and surgery, combined with an excess consumption of gluten, leaves us all susceptible to developing food sensitivities. There are a number of things you can do to address food sensitivities. One of the best is to get a broad-spectrum digestive enzyme, usually one tailored for multiple strains of food intolerance. So this is an enzyme that would likely contain enzymes for gluten digestion. That would be, of course, the DPP-IV enzyme, but you would also have enzymes in there for milk digestion, which would include lactose and casein, soy digestion, all the common allergens we find in food today. And there are such enzymes out there. You just got to look for one that covers the whole spectrum. So taking this kind of enzyme at the beginning of a meal, this will help to break down your food much more thoroughly, and it's also very helpful for inflammation in the body, even if you take it on an empty stomach after the meal, so it can enter the bloodstream and break down whatever bit parts of that food allergen is causing inflammation. Thanks for watching. I'm Jason Carter, and I'll see you next time on ENZYMENTAL. Stay healthy.